Looking back at 1917, the future master of Soviet power should not have seemed to be Stalin. Another man stood in the spotlight. Leon Trotsky, a brilliant orator, chairman of the Petrograd Soviet, one of the principal organizers of the October Revolution, People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs, and later the chief organizer and leader of the Red Army. His name was known throughout Russia and beyond. His armored train traveled across the fronts of the Russian Civil War. His speeches filled auditoriums. To supporters of the revolution, he appeared to be a figure of almost Lenin-like stature. Beside him, Stalin looked very different. Not a great public speaker, not a celebrated military leader, not a man whose writings were read across Europe. He was instead a party organizer, accustomed to meetings, correspondence, appointments, and internal discipline. But only a few years passed. Trotsky lost control of the army, then his seat in the Politburo, then his membership in the party, then Moscow, then the Soviet Union. And in 1940, he lost his life. How did a man who had stood so high lose to someone long dismissed as a grey party functionary? And why is the explanation that Trotsky simply ruined everything himself too convenient to be complete? The first explanation appears almost automatically, and it is also the most dangerous. Trotsky lost because he was Jewish. He was indeed born Lev Davidovich Bronstein into a Jewish family in the Kherson Governorate. Anti-Semitism in the Russian Empire during the Revolution and throughout the Civil War was a real political force. White propaganda transformed Trotsky into a symbol of so-called Jewish Bolshevism, as though the actions of individual revolutionaries justified blaming an entire people. Later, the campaign against Trotskyism could also take on anti-Semitic overtones. But his background does not explain the mechanism of his defeat. Trotsky's opponents were not limited to people hostile toward Jews. Stalin created the first powerful coalition against him, together with Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev, both of whom also came from Jewish families. They united not because of ethnicity, but because they feared Trotsky's political superiority and the possibility of his leadership. Trotsky's background matters when we try to understand the atmosphere of the era, but it does not explain why he lost party votes, appointments, and alliances. The second explanation sounds almost like the opposite. Trotsky was so brilliant and talented that he should have won. In 1917, he led the Petrograd Soviet and played a central role in the Military Revolutionary Committee. During the Civil War, he oversaw the creation of the Red Army, which grew into an enormous military force. He could make decisions quickly, travel between the fronts, persuade, command, write, and argue. In terms of public fame, Stalin could not compare with him. But revolution, civil war, and the struggle for power after Lenin required different qualities. A revolution elevates the person who can transform discontent into action. A war elevates the person who can transform chaos into an army. But a party state elevates the person who controls everyday political life, who appoints secretaries, forms delegations, receives reports, knows the weaknesses of local officials, and decides whose career will continue. Trotsky was powerful on the platform and in moments of crisis. Stalin was powerful within the apparatus and in the long game. The third explanation is the most convenient. Trotsky had only himself to blame. And there is some truth to it. He gave the impression of being arrogant. He joined the Bolsheviks late and did not possess the same network of personal relationships among veteran party members that others had spent years building. He disliked routine bureaucratic work. He often preferred a brilliant article to the patient gathering of votes. He struggled to build lasting coalitions and understood too late when a temporary opponent had already become the principal threat. He underestimated Stalin. But even this formula fails to explain the most important point. A politician can be arrogant and still retain power. He can make a mistake and recover. He can lose one argument and win the next. Trotsky's mistakes became irreversible because a system was already forming around him that could transform defeat in a debate into the loss of a position, and the loss of a position into exclusion from political life. Trotsky made mistakes. Stalin built a mechanism that made his opponent's mistakes fatal. This is where the central contradiction of the entire story appears. Trotsky was more famous, more charismatic, more powerful as an orator and as a symbol of the revolution. But Stalin proved stronger in the places where real power now existed: the secretariat, committees, appointments, party conferences, and discipline. Trotsky tried to win the argument. Stalin learned how to win control over the structure in which the argument took place. Trotsky's defeat did not happen in a single day. It was a slow disappearance from his own revolution. In January 1925, he was removed as People's Commissar for Military and Naval Affairs and chairman of the Revolutionary Military Council. In the autumn of 1926, he was removed from the Politburo. In November 1927, he was expelled from the party. In January of the following year, he was sent into internal exile in Alma-Ata. In February 1929, he was expelled from the Soviet Union. Each step appeared to be a separate party decision. Together, they formed a staircase leading downward. At first, Trotsky was a man without whom it was difficult to imagine the Bolshevik victory. Then he became the leader of a deviation, then a violator of party unity, then an exile, then the symbolic source of every conspiracy the regime needed to uncover again and again. He was not pushed out with a single blow. He was separated from power layer by layer until nothing remained of his former position except his name, and the state transformed that name into an accusation. If you value calm historical analysis without myths or propaganda, support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel. And write in the comments which country and city you are watching from. It helps us understand where our audience is located and when we should publish new videos. Now we can choose the correct criterion. The question is not who was more intelligent, not who spoke more impressively, not who appeared to be the natural heir to the revolution. The real question is different. Who controlled the party at the moment when the party became the principal source of power? After the Civil War, decisions were increasingly made not in the streets, but in offices. In 1921, the 10th Party Congress adopted the resolution on party unity. Organized factions were to be dissolved, and violations of discipline could be punished by measures up to and including expulsion. The decision was made during a period of severe crisis, uprisings, famine, and fear that the state might collapse. But it created a dangerous instrument. Organized disagreement could now be presented not as a legitimate struggle between competing views, but as a threat to the unity of the revolution. Trotsky himself belonged to the leadership of a system that placed the party monopoly above free political competition. Later, that principle was turned against him. Stalin did not need to prove that Trotsky was a criminal in the ordinary sense. He only needed to establish, step by step, the image of a separate faction, Trotskyism, opposed to Leninism and party discipline. While Trotsky remained a figure of revolutionary glory, Stalin was becoming a figure of everyday party administration. In April 1922, Stalin became General Secretary of the Central Committee. At first, the position did not look like a throne. It was seen primarily as an organizational role. But that was precisely where its strength lay. Appointments, transfers, recommendations, documents, and communication with local party organizations passed through the Secretariat. The General Secretary learned who owed their position to whom, who was in conflict with the leadership, who was suitable for promotion, and who could be deprived of influence. He gained the ability not merely to persuade delegates, but to influence which people would become delegates in the first place. 2 seconds. Here is the main answer. Trotsky did not lose only to Stalin. He lost to the apparatus that Stalin gradually brought under his control. The position of General Secretary did not automatically make Stalin a dictator. His power did not grow without resistance, nor did it grow by itself. But it gave him something Trotsky lacked: a stable network of personnel obligations, constant access to internal information, and the ability to conduct the struggle every day, not only during major debates. Trotsky believed that the main battle was over the correct party line. Stalin understood that the main battle was over the people who would vote for that line. And he did not act alone. During Lenin's final illness, an informal alliance emerged between Stalin, Zinoviev and Kamenev. It would later become known as the Troika. The Allies had different motives, but they shared one interest: preventing Trotsky's rise. This was not a duel between two titans. Trotsky faced a coalition of experienced party leaders who could act through the Politburo, the Central Committee, the party press, and party congresses. While he answered with articles and speeches, his opponents strengthened the idea that he was the one threatening collective leadership. Later, the coalitions changed. Zinoviev and Kamenev broke with Stalin and attempted to unite with Trotsky, but by then it was too late. Stalin first used them against Trotsky, then used other allies against them, and finally eliminated his former partners. He did not need to be stronger than every opponent at the same time. He only needed to make sure that his opponents never united in time. But did Lenin not warn the party about Stalin? He did. In the document known as the Letter to the Congress, Lenin wrote that Stalin, after becoming General Secretary, had concentrated enormous power in his hands, and he expressed doubts about whether Stalin would always be capable of using that power with sufficient caution. In an edition written in January, Lenin described Stalin as too rude and suggested considering his removal. But the document was not an order of succession. Lenin criticized more than Stalin. He described Trotsky as perhaps the most capable man in the contemporary Central Committee, while also noting his excessive self-confidence and his tendency to approach questions from an administrative perspective. Lenin did not appoint a successor. He warned of a conflict between the two strongest figures and feared a split. After Lenin's death, the letter was read to delegations at the 13th Party Congress under restricted conditions, but it did not become the basis of an open, party-wide campaign. At that time, Zinoviev and Kamenev supported keeping Stalin in his position. Trotsky failed to turn Lenin's criticism into a political victory. The document could have damaged Stalin, but a document cannot vote, appoint secretaries, or build a coalition by itself. There was also an ideological dimension. Trotsky linked the fate of the Soviet Revolution to the international revolutionary process and warned against bureaucratization. Stalin advanced the formula of socialism in one country. He argued that the Soviet Union was capable of building socialism even if revolutions in the West had been defeated. To party officials who had survived a world war, revolution, civil war, and economic collapse, Stalin's formula could sound calmer and more practical. Trotsky reminded them of new tensions, new conflicts, and the need to criticize their own apparatus. Stalin offered that apparatus a historic mission: stability and confidence that it was the force building the new state. Trotsky spoke about the future of world revolution. Stalin offered the party the feeling that it had already become the state. Trotsky was also inconvenient to more people than Stalin alone. He had joined the Bolsheviks late. He possessed an enormous military reputation. His independence irritated veteran party members. Many feared not only his ideas, but also the possibility of a new personal leader who would be too brilliant, too sharp, and too difficult to control. That is why people who would later become enemies of one another united against him. That is how political fear operates. It creates alliances that would be impossible in peaceful times. But this story must not be misunderstood. Trotsky did not lose only because he was Jewish. His background was exploited by propaganda, but it does not explain the machinery of the struggle within the party apparatus. Nor was he an innocent democratic liberal in the modern sense. Trotsky was one of the creators of the Bolshevik dictatorship. He participated in the construction of the one-party state and defended harsh methods of revolutionary rule. Lenin did not appoint him as his successor. A single testament could not automatically stop Stalin. And we cannot confidently claim that a Trotsky victory would have transformed the Soviet Union into a free country. History offers no such guarantee. The correct formulation is more complicated. Trotsky was one of the creators of a system in which political defeat gradually ceased to mean ordinary opposition. Then he himself became a victim of that logic. That is the essence of his tragedy. Not that he was an outsider to the revolution, but that he was one of its creators and was still crushed by its machinery. That is why several things from this story are worth remembering. Stalin began accumulating influence within the party apparatus while Lenin was still alive, becoming General Secretary in 1922. Trotsky was defeated not by one man alone, but by shifting coalitions, party discipline, and a system of personnel control. The ban on factions, adopted under Lenin, gave the leadership an instrument that could be used to declare political disagreement a threat to the party. The letter to the Congress criticized Stalin, but it did not appoint Trotsky as Lenin's successor and could not replace the real struggle for a majority. And finally, Trotsky lost gradually. His military position, his seat in the Politburo, his party membership, internal exile, expulsion, and physical destruction became links in a single chain. Trotsky was a man of the revolutionary explosion. Stalin became a man of the party machine. Trotsky knew how to speak to history. Stalin knew how to speak to the apparatus. Trotsky could win from the platform. Stalin won in corridors, committees, appointments, and votes. And when the revolution transformed into a state, that became decisive. Trotsky did not lose because he lacked talent. He lost because his talent belonged to one era, while power was already passing into another. The age of revolution required a man capable of igniting the masses and building an army. The age of the party state was won by the man who understood how to manage lists, positions, fear, and loyalty. Trotsky helped create a system in which the defeated did not simply enter the opposition. They disappeared from power, then from the party, then from the country, then from official memory, and finally, from life itself.